Hey there, and welcome. Welcome to GDPR Stand Up. I'm Rocio Baeza, and this is the channel where we talk about all things related to GDPR. So we understand that you are probably trying to understand what does GDPR mean, what does it require for your company, so that you can focus only on that. We're not about making these long PowerPoint presentations using jargon and making things complicated. We don't think that's a good use of your time. We're looking to provide simple, easy to understand information so that you get information that you need. You can get on the path of becoming GDPR compliant, and you can go back to focusing on the other priorities that you have to focus on. All right, so with that, let's get started. So today's topic is going to be on, and let me just get out of the way here. We're going to be continuing on our GDPR compliance checklist, and we're going to be talking about third party contracts. So, third party contracts, who does this apply to? So, if your company receives or share any type of personal data with another party, so think another company, think a contractor or a subcontractor, this GDPR requirement applies to you. And it's important to note that it doesn't matter if the personal data is sold, rented, or obtained freely. If you hold and if you work with personal data belonging to EU citizens, this GDPR requirement applies to you. All right, what else do you need to know about this? So, when it comes to companies working with other third parties, one of the significant changes that GDPR introduces is that if you're working with other parties to help you run the business, all parties that hold personal data are actually now liable to pay damages, fines, and any other penalties for not complying with GDPR. So this was I would say that previously it was mostly inferred that the data controller, the company that directly obtained personal information from an individual, they would be the ones that would be like fully accountable for any type of fines, penalties, or data breach notifications. But given that we're starting to see more and more cases where companies are leveraging third party partners, sharing personal data with those partners, GDPR clarifies that yes, the original collector of the data has a level of accountability, but anybody else, any other parties that the first company shared it with, like those companies that hold personal information, are actually also accountable and have a set of responsibilities for protecting that. Okay, what else do you need to know about this? So there are actually, so GDPR explicitly requires that if you're working with another third party, and you're sharing personal data of EU citizens, you need a written agreement in place, and the agreements have to answer a number of basic questions. So things like they have to define what data will actually be processed as part of that service arrangement. What kind of processing will take place? In other words, what will you actually be doing with that data? Things like, will you be reviewing that information? Are you collecting that information? Are you storing that information? Are you making decisions based on that information? You have to specify, all right, like what actions are being done on the data. You also need to answer, or explain or capture. So, what's the purpose for processing the data that is being shared? And how long will that actual processing be in effect? So, is that a one time thing, or is it something that's going on a regular basis? where like the data is being reviewed or referenced or acted on more than one time. And it should also answer questions like, so what kind of personal data will actually be processed? And what kind of categories of individuals will we be processing? Uh, Also, what are the rights and the obligations of the data controller? So, what's a data controller? The data controller is basically is usually the first party that receives data from the individual. So say if you have an online service, there's a online application or registration. If you are collecting that information from the individual, you would be considered the data controller. So you're basically providing a service, you're requesting information about the individual, and you are receiving that information directly from the individual. All right. So to recap, if you're working with any third parties where there's some type of exchange of personal data, you will now need written agreements. So by third parties, these can be other organizations, these can be contractors, these can be employees, anybody that is not in your organization that you are sharing personal data of EU citizens with. In these written agreements, there has to be specific minimum requirements met. So there are specific terms that the written agreements have to include. And all parties are liable to pay any damages, fines, or penalties that come out of any type of security incident or GDPR non compliance. So, in terms of next steps, I would say these are it. So, you would want to give your legal counsel a heads up that your third party agreements and templates will need to be reviewed. It would be helpful to look at your data inventory to make sure that it lists all third parties that you work with, but it also flags, all right, which third parties am I sharing personal data with, and which parties are providing me with personal data. So those that group will basically be the group of agreements that will need to be reviewed at some point to make sure that written agreements are in place, but also that the written agreements include the requirements that GDPR calls for. And after you do that, you want to make sure that you set up a discussion with legal so that you're working together to come up with a game plan to go through that process. So, because third, because relationships with third parties oftentimes start at the business side, it probably also makes sense to alert those product teams that third party agreements and templates will be reviewed and possibly refreshed. All right, so that completes today's session. Thank you very much for checking us out. In terms of our next steps, we did reference that it will be helpful to look at your data inventory. Now, if this is something that you do not have yet or are not quite sure how to complete the step, know that we have a free virtual training available. We provide you with the templates that you need, with a list of information that you need to gather, and an example of what that end result should actually look like. And I guide you through this process step by step so that you don't feel lost and you avoid the challenges that might come with going through this exercise. And if you run into any questions that you're not able to tackle on your own, just know that I will be doing weekly virtual sessions where we can walk through how to put together a data inventory. And if there are any questions that you have, you can use it as free consulting time to overcome any challenges that you may be facing. And yes, this is absolutely free. And if you want to check it out, you can get that at gdprstandup.com. Again, thank you very much for checking out this session. We thank you for your time, and we will see you on the next one. Goodbye.